Most people drove past because they were afraid of getting involved. Grace Miller stopped because she remembered what it felt like to be forgotten. Rain hammered against the windshield of Grace's aging Honda Civic as she tightened her grip on the steering wheel. The dashboard clock glowed 10:47 p.m. in soft green numbers. It had been another 14-hour day. 8 hours at the diner. 4 hours cleaning offices downtown. 2 more spent helping Noah finish a school project about American national parks. Her shoulders ached. Her feet throbbed. And all she wanted was to get home to the small apartment she shared with her 6-year-old son on the south side of Columbus, Ohio. The gas gauge hovered just above empty. A grocery receipt sat folded beside her purse. $32.17 remained in her checking account until Friday. She knew the exact amount because mothers like Grace always knew the exact amount. Every dollar had a purpose before it even arrived. The rain intensified as she turned onto a quieter county road that cut through a wooded area outside the city. Most nights she avoided it, but construction on the interstate forced traffic onto unfamiliar routes. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating rows of dark trees. Then something caught her eye. At first she thought it was debris near the shoulder of the road. A fallen branch maybe. But another flash of lightning revealed a shape. A person. Grace immediately eased off the gas. Her heart skipped. Through the sheets of rain, she could make out a man sitting awkwardly beside a damaged guardrail, one arm draped across his knee. He wasn't waving for help. He wasn't calling out. He simply sat there motionless beneath the storm. Several vehicles passed in the opposite direction. None slowed down. Grace glanced at the clock. She thought about Noah sleeping at Mrs. Harper's apartment downstairs. She thought about getting home. She thought about the warnings every woman heard growing up. Don't stop. Don't get involved. Keep driving. Her foot hovered over the accelerator. Then she looked back at the man through her side mirror. The memory came without warning. 6 years earlier. A hospital. Hallway. Noah burning with fever in her arms. Her own panic. A stranger who had helped her when nobody else did. Grace exhaled slowly. You'd never forgive yourself, she whispered. She pulled onto the shoulder. Rain immediately soaked her jacket as she stepped out of the car. The cold wind cut through her clothes. Sir, she called cautiously. Are you okay? The man lifted his head slightly. Even in the darkness, she could see he was somewhere in his early 40s. Dark hair streaked with rain. Expensive clothes now drenched and dirty. There was something unusual about him. Not fear. Not panic. Just exhaustion. Deep, overwhelming exhaustion. I'm fine, he said. His voice was calm, but strained. You should keep driving. Grace almost laughed. Fine was probably the last word she would have chosen. Nobody sits beside a road in a thunderstorm because they're fine. The corner of his mouth twitched faintly. Fair point. She moved closer, keeping a respectful distance. Do you need an ambulance? No, police. Definitely not. That answer surprised her. Another flash of lightning illuminated his face. For a brief second she noticed sharp features, tired blue eyes, and something else she couldn't quite place. Sadness. Not ordinary sadness. The kind that settled into a person and refused to leave. Do you have someone I can call? She asked. The man looked away toward the dark woods. No, the answer came too quickly. Too firmly. Grace frowned. Most people would call family. A friend. Somebody. Yet he sounded like a man who truly had no one. Rainwater dripped from his hair. He looked cold. Exhausted. Alone. The same 3 words Grace had used to describe herself for years. Well, she finally said, I can't leave you out here. The man stared at her. You don't even know me. That's true. This could be a terrible idea. Grace smiled despite herself. Most worthwhile things are. For the first time, something changed in his expression. Not happiness. Not exactly. But the faintest glimpse of warmth. As if he had forgotten what kindness looked like and was suddenly seeing it again. He slowly rose to his feet. A wave of dizziness crossed his face before he steadied himself against the guardrail. Grace instinctively stepped forward. Easy. I'm okay. You already used that line. Another small smile appeared. This one lasted a second longer. Neither of them noticed the black SUV parked nearly a quarter-mile away beyond the curve of the road. They didn't see the worried man inside, gripping his phone while watching through rain-streaked glass. And they certainly didn't know that half a dozen people had been searching desperately for the stranger Grace had just offered to help. Because the man standing beside her wasn't merely a traveler caught in a storm. He was Ethan Carter, billionaire, CEO, one of the most powerful men in America. And if Grace had driven past 30 seconds earlier, the secret he carried might have remained buried forever. The heater rattled softly as Grace guided her Honda through the rain-slicked streets toward her apartment complex. Ethan sat quietly in the passenger seat, staring out the window at the passing lights. Neither spoke much during the drive. The silence did not feel awkward. It felt like two exhausted people sharing the same storm. Grace pulled into the parking lot of the aging brick building just before 11:30. Several lights glowed from apartment windows above. Most of the city had already settled into sleep. "This is not much," Grace said as she turned off the engine. "But it is warm." Ethan glanced at her. "Warm sounds perfect." A few minutes later, they climbed the narrow staircase to the second floor. Grace unlocked the door and stepped inside. The familiar scent of laundry detergent and tomato soup lingered in the small apartment. The furniture did not match. The carpet had seen better days. A stack of Noah's school books sat neatly beside the couch. Nothing was expensive. Everything was cared for. Ethan paused just inside the doorway. For reasons he could not explain, the simple apartment felt more welcoming than the penthouse he had left behind. Grace handed him a clean towel. "Bathroom is down the hall. You can dry off while I make some tea." "You do not have to do that." "I know." She offered a small smile. "But I am doing it anyway." Ethan disappeared down the hall. Grace moved quietly through the kitchen, filling a kettle and placing it on the stove. The refrigerator hummed softly. Inside sat a gallon of milk, eggs, leftover soup, and a container of grapes Noah loved. Not much. Enough. That had become her definition of success. The bathroom door opened several minutes later. Ethan emerged with damp hair and rolled-up sleeves. The expensive jacket was gone, replaced by one of Grace's oversized gray hoodies she had found in the hall closet. Somehow the billionaire executive looked more comfortable than he had beside the road. "The sweatshirt belonged to my brother," Grace explained. "He moved to Arizona 3 years ago and never asked for it back." Ethan looked down at the hoodie. "Tell him I appreciate the loan." Grace laughed softly. The sound surprised both of them. It had been a long time since laughter came easily. Suddenly another door opened. Small footsteps padded across the hallway. "Mom." Noah's sleepy voice floated into the room. "Are you home?" Grace immediately turned. "Hey, buddy." Noah appeared, rubbing one eye. His blonde hair stuck up in every direction. He froze when he spotted Ethan standing in the kitchen. The little boy blinked twice. "Who is that?" Grace crouched beside him. "His name is Ethan. He needed some help tonight." Noah studied him seriously. "Are you a good guy?" Ethan seemed caught off guard by the question. "I try to be." Noah considered this answer. "Okay." Then he walked straight toward Ethan and held out a small dinosaur. "This is Rex." Ethan stared at the toy before carefully accepting it. "Nice to meet you, Rex." Noah nodded approvingly. "He likes you." Grace shook her head. "That was fast." "Rex is a good judge of character," Noah explained before yawning dramatically. Within minutes, Grace guided him back toward bed. Ethan watched them disappear down the hallway. The scene stirred something painful inside him. Something he had spent years burying beneath meetings, acquisitions, and quarterly reports. When Grace returned, she found him standing before a collection of framed photographs on a small bookshelf. Most showed Noah at different ages. Birthday cakes, school plays, soccer, games. One photograph sat slightly apart from the others. A young woman with auburn hair stood smiling beneath a maple tree, her arm wrapped around a teenage Grace. Ethan's expression changed instantly. The color drained from his face. His eyes locked onto the image as though the room had suddenly vanished around him. Grace noticed. "That is my mother," she said quietly. "She passed away when I was 19. Ethan did not answer. His gaze remained fixed on the photograph. The kettle whistled softly in the kitchen. Neither of them moved. Because for the second time that night, Ethan Carter was staring at something he never expected to see again. And this time, he was absolutely certain it was not a coincidence. Grace followed his gaze toward the photograph. The kitchen suddenly felt quieter. Even the rain tapping against the windows seemed distant. Ethan stared at the image for several long seconds before finally speaking. "Your mother's name was Sarah?" Grace looked surprised. "Yes." Ethan slowly turned toward her. "Sarah Miller?" A chill ran through Grace. "How do you know that?" Ethan immediately looked away. The question had come too fast. Too naturally. He searched for an explanation. "I knew someone with the same name years ago." Grace studied him carefully. Something felt different. Ever since he noticed the photograph, his entire demeanor had changed. He seemed distracted, unsettled, as if he had seen a ghost. There are probably thousands of Sarah Millers, Grace said gently. Ethan nodded, but he knew that was not true. Not the Sarah. Not the woman smiling in that picture. 25 years ago, another photograph had sat on a desk in a private office inside Carter Industries. He remembered it clearly. The auburn hair. The same smile. The same bright eyes. Back then he had been a teenager who understood very little about the complicated world of adults. But he remembered the arguments. The whispers. The tension inside his family. And he remembered one name. Sarah. Grace carried 2 mugs of tea to the table. You look like you have seen a ghost. Ethan accepted the cup. Maybe I have. She smiled slightly, assuming it was a joke. Ethan wished it felt like one. For several minutes they sat quietly. The warm tea helped chase away the cold from the storm. Somewhere down the hall, Noah slept peacefully. The apartment felt safe. Ordinary. Yet Ethan could not stop looking toward the photograph. Finally, Grace broke the silence. You never answered my question. Which one? What were you doing out there tonight? Ethan stared into his cup. The truth was impossible. At least for now. I needed time to think. In the middle of a thunderstorm? It seemed quieter than my normal life. Grace laughed softly. That sounds like something my mother would have said. Ethan looked up immediately. Really? She always believed people could hear themselves better when the world got loud. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. Another memory surfaced. A younger Sarah standing beside a fountain outside Carter headquarters, saying almost the exact same words. It was impossible. Yet every minute inside this apartment created more questions. Grace noticed his expression again. You really did know her, did you not? Ethan hesitated. Maybe. Maybe is not an answer. He offered a small smile. Maybe it is the only one I have. Before Grace could respond, a faint buzzing sound interrupted them. Ethan's eyes shifted toward the kitchen counter. His phone. The device had remained silent all evening because the battery had died hours earlier. Now the charging cable had finally restored power. The screen lit up. One notification appeared. Then another. Then 10 more. Within seconds the display filled with missed calls, urgent messages, and voicemail alerts. Grace stared. That seems important. Ethan's jaw tightened. He recognized several names immediately. His chief operating officer. His executive assistant. Security personnel. Members of the board. More than 30 missed calls. One message appeared at the top. Where are you? Everyone is looking for you. Ethan quickly turned the phone face down. Too late. Grace had already seen enough. You were not kidding about having a busy life. No, should somebody know you are safe? Ethan exhaled slowly. Probably. Then why have you not called them? Ethan looked around the apartment. At the faded furniture. The family photos. Noah's crayons scattered near the coffee table. For the first time in years, nobody wanted something from him. Nobody expected a decision. Nobody needed a signature. Nobody cared about quarterly earnings or stock prices. Grace had stopped because a stranger needed help. Nothing more. Because I was not ready to go back yet, he admitted. Grace considered his answer. Oddly, she understood. More than she wanted to. Sometimes the hardest place to return was the life everyone else thought you should want. Ethan's phone buzzed again. Another message appeared across the screen. This one made his blood run cold. It came from a private investigator he had quietly hired 3 months earlier. The message contained only one sentence. We found the woman from the file. Her daughter is Grace Miller. Ethan slowly lifted his eyes toward Grace. She sat across from him completely unaware that her name had just unlocked a mystery that powerful people had spent decades trying to bury. Sleep did not come easily that night. Long after Grace had gone to bed and the apartment had fallen silent, Ethan remained awake on the couch. The soft glow from a lamp in the corner illuminated the framed photographs lining the bookshelf. Every few minutes his eyes drifted back to Sarah Miller's smiling face. 25 years. 25 years since her name had last appeared in conversations that powerful people desperately wanted forgotten. Yet here she was. Not in a file. Not in a report. Not in a rumor. A real woman. A mother. And somehow her daughter had become the person who pulled him out of a storm. Ethan rubbed a hand across his face. The coincidence felt impossible. The message from his investigator remained open on his phone. He read it again. Then again. Grace Miller. Daughter of Sarah Miller. The words carried weight far beyond what Grace could possibly understand. Across town, Executives, attorneys, and security teams were probably searching for him. Yet none of that mattered at the moment. Because for the first time in decades, a door that had been sealed shut was beginning to open. The following morning, sunlight streamed through the apartment windows. The storm had passed. The air smelled fresh. Grace awoke before 6, as she always did. Habit had replaced alarm clocks years ago. She moved quietly through the kitchen preparing breakfast. Eggs sizzled gently in a pan. Coffee brewed. Noah sat at the table coloring a picture of a dinosaur wearing a firefighter helmet. Ethan entered moments later. He had borrowed another sweatshirt and looked surprisingly normal for a man whose face occasionally appeared on magazine covers. "Morning," Grace said. "Morning." Noah looked up immediately. "You are still here." Ethan smiled. "Apparently." Noah nodded as though this was excellent news. "Good." Grace placed a plate on the table. "I hope you like scrambled eggs." Ethan looked at the meal, then at her. "You keep feeding strangers. Only the ones who look like they have not eaten." Ethan almost laughed. He could not remember the last time someone spoke to him so honestly. No networking. No strategy. No hidden agenda. Just simple truth. As they ate, Noah talked nonstop about school, dinosaurs, and a future career that apparently involved becoming both an astronaut and a baseball player at the same time. Ethan listened carefully, more carefully than he listened to most board meetings. Eventually, Grace glanced at the clock and stood. "I need to get ready for work." Ethan nodded. "And I should probably make a few phone calls. Your mysterious people must be worried." "Very worried." Grace smiled. "Then maybe it is time you tell them you survived." Ethan stepped outside onto the apartment balcony while Grace got Noah ready for school. The morning sun reflected off parked cars below. He finally returned a call. The line connected instantly. "Mr. Carter." The voice sounded relieved. "Thank God." "Good morning, Daniel." "Good morning? We have been searching for you all night." Ethan winced slightly. "I know. The board is panicking. Your assistant has not slept. Security has checked 3 states." Ethan glanced through the balcony door. Inside, Grace was helping Noah zip up his backpack. The scene felt strangely peaceful. "I need you to do something," Ethan said. "Anything. Pull every file connected to Sarah Miller." Silence followed. "Sarah Miller? Every document. Every archive. Every internal memo. I want everything." Daniel hesitated. "Sir, those records were sealed decades ago." "Then unseal them." Another pause. "Does this have something to do with why you disappeared?" Ethan watched Grace laugh at something Noah said. "Yes." "What did you find?" Ethan's gaze settled on the photograph sitting on the bookshelf inside. "I think I found someone." An hour later, Ethan accompanied Grace and Noah to the elementary school. The walk took 10 minutes. Trees still dripped from the previous night's storm. Noah insisted on holding Ethan's hand the entire way. Grace found the sight unexpectedly heartwarming. At the school entrance, Noah stopped. "Will you be here later?" he asked. Ethan hesitated. It was a simple question, yet the answer felt complicated. "I'm not sure." Noah looked disappointed. Then he reached into his backpack and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Then take this." Ethan unfolded it carefully. It was a drawing. 3 stick figures standing together beneath a bright yellow sun. One was labeled MOM. One was labeled Noah. The third simply said Ethan. Something tightened inside his chest. Before he could respond, Noah hugged him quickly and ran toward the school doors. Grace smiled apologetically. "He gets attached." Ethan stared at the drawing. "I noticed." But as he watched Noah disappear inside, another thought surfaced. If the secrets surrounding Sarah Miller were as serious as he suspected, then getting attached might soon become dangerous in an entirely different way. Because somewhere inside Carter Holdings, someone had spent 25 years making sure the truth never surfaced. And now that truth was waking up. The rest of the day moved forward as if nothing had changed, but Ethan knew everything had. By noon, he was sitting alone in a private conference room inside a discreet office building owned by Carter Holdings. He had avoided headquarters. Too many questions. Too many eyes. A thick stack of documents sat before him. Some pages were yellowed with age. Others had been printed only hours earlier. Daniel stood across the table, unusually tense. "This is everything we could recover," he said quietly. Ethan flipped through the files. Employment records. Internal memos. Financial statements. Performance reviews. Then he found her name. Sarah Miller. The photograph attached to the personnel file was unmistakable. The same woman from Grace's bookshelf. The same smile. The same eyes. Ethan felt his stomach tighten. She worked directly for my father? Daniel nodded. For nearly 4 years. Ethan continued reading. Every page raised more questions than answers. Sarah had received outstanding evaluations. Promotions had been recommended. Senior executives praised her work. Then suddenly the records changed. 1 memo. 2 memos. 3. Complaints appeared. Allegations. Investigations. Then termination. Immediate. Final. No explanation beyond vague corporate language. Ethan leaned back in his chair. This makes no sense. I thought the same thing. Daniel slid another folder across the table. That is why I kept digging. Ethan opened it. Inside were copies of archived emails recovered from backup servers. Most had been deleted decades ago. One message immediately caught his attention. His father's name appeared in the sender line. Richard Carter. Ethan read silently. The room seemed to grow colder. My God, he whispered. Daniel remained silent. The email was not about poor performance. It was not about misconduct. It was about protecting the company from a scandal. Sarah had apparently discovered information connected to a financial arrangement involving several senior executives. Information someone wanted buried. Ethan read further. Then his eyes stopped on a single sentence. Sarah Miller must never be allowed to speak publicly. He slowly lowered the page. Who authorized this? Daniel hesitated. Your father signed off on the final decision. Ethan closed his eyes. For years he had admired Richard Carter, the legendary businessman, the visionary leader, the father who built an empire from almost nothing. But the documents in front of him painted a different picture. Not evil, not cruel, simply a man willing to sacrifice someone else's future to protect his own. Ethan stared through the conference room window. Cars moved below. People hurried along sidewalks. Ordinary lives. Ordinary struggles. Sarah had been one of those people. And somehow her story had collided with his again after 25 years. Meanwhile, across town, Grace balanced a tray of drinks at the diner where she worked lunch shifts. The lunch rush had arrived early. Orders piled up. Coffee machines hissed. Customers chatted over sandwiches and burgers. Yet her thoughts kept drifting back to Ethan. Something about him felt unfinished. She could not explain it. Most strangers entered a person's life and disappeared just as quickly. But Ethan carried a weight she recognized. The kind people hid behind polite smiles. During a brief break, she checked her phone. A message from Mrs. Harper appeared. Noah got an A on his spelling test. He has told everyone in the building. Grace smiled immediately. Her son could turn any accomplishment into a community announcement. The simple message brightened her day. Then another notification appeared. Unknown number. Grace almost ignored it. Almost. Curiosity won. She opened the message. There was no greeting. No introduction. Only a question. How long has Ethan Carter been staying with you? Grace froze. The diner noise faded into the background. Ethan Carter. The name meant nothing to her. Yet something about the message made her uneasy. A second text arrived moments later. Be careful. You do not know who he really is. Grace stared at the screen. Her pulse quickened. Across the city, Ethan's phone rang. Daniel glanced at the caller identification and frowned. You should take this. Who is it? Daniel swallowed. Your uncle. Ethan's expression hardened immediately. Of all the people connected to the old files, William Carter was the one name he had hoped not to see. The phone continued ringing between them. Because if the records were true, William Carter knew exactly what happened to Sarah Miller, and he would do almost anything to make sure the past stayed buried. The phone rang 3 more times before Ethan finally answered. William. Silence lingered on the line for a moment. Then came the familiar voice. Calm. Controlled. There you are. Ethan leaned back in his chair. You seem remarkably unsurprised that I disappeared. You have always had a talent for creating unnecessary complications. Ethan glanced toward the stack of files on the conference table. Funny. I was just thinking the same thing about you. Another pause followed. You found something, Williams said. It was not a question. Ethan's grip tightened slightly around the phone. Did Sarah Miller mean anything to you? The silence that followed lasted just long enough to provide an answer. Be careful where you are digging, William finally said. That sounds like a warning. That sounds like advice. Ethan stood and walked toward the window. A woman lost her career, her reputation, her future. Someone made sure her name disappeared. I want to know why. William's voice hardened. Some stories belong in the past. Not this one. You are making a mistake. The call ended. Ethan stared at the dark screen. For years, his uncle had been one of the most powerful figures inside Carter Holdings. He never panicked, never reacted emotionally. Yet the moment Sarah's name appeared, William had become defensive. That alone told Ethan everything he needed to know. Across town, Grace folded the mysterious text message into the back of her mind, but she could not ignore the uneasy feeling it left behind. The lunch rush finally ended around 3 o'clock. She wiped down tables, refilled condiments, and tried to focus on work. Still, her thoughts kept returning to the message. Ethan Carter. The name sounded familiar now, not because she recognized it personally, but because she had seen it somewhere. A magazine cover near a grocery checkout line. A business article online. Something. During her break, she searched the name on her phone. The moment the results appeared, her eyes widened. News articles, interviews, corporate announcements, photographs. The man she had picked up beside a road stood smiling beside world leaders, business executives, and celebrities. Billionaire CEO Ethan Carter. Grace stared at the screen. You have got to be kidding me. She quickly closed the browser, then reopened it. The photographs remained. The same blue eyes. The same face. The same man currently borrowing sweatshirts in her apartment. Her first reaction was disbelief. Her second was confusion. Why would someone like him be sitting alone beside a road during a storm? Why hide who he was? Why stay? The questions multiplied faster than answers. That evening, Grace picked up Noah from school. The 6-year-old immediately launched into an enthusiastic explanation about a science project involving volcanoes. Halfway through the story, he suddenly stopped. Is Ethan coming back? Grace smiled despite herself. Maybe. Noah looked pleased. Good. They climbed the apartment stairs together. As Grace unlocked the door, she noticed something unusual. A small package sat outside. No return address. No delivery company logo. Just her name written neatly across the front. Her stomach tightened. She carried it inside carefully. Noah immediately became curious. What is it? I do not know. The box was light. Inside sat a single old photograph. Nothing else. No note. No explanation. Grace stared at the image. The picture showed her mother standing beside 2 men in front of a building she did not recognize. One man was young, handsome, wearing an expensive suit. The second man stood partially in shadow. But the first man made Grace freeze. Because even though the photograph was decades old, she recognized him instantly. It was Richard Carter, Ethan's father, and written across the bottom in faded blue ink were 6 words that changed everything. If anything happens, tell the truth. Grace sat motionless at the kitchen table long after Noah had gone to his room. The photograph remained in her hands. The edges were worn. The colors had faded with time. Yet the faces were unmistakable. Her mother, Richard Carter, and another man standing slightly behind them, whose features were partially obscured by shadow. She turned the picture over several times, hoping to find another clue. Nothing. Only the 6 handwritten words on the front. If anything happens, tell the truth. The sentence echoed through her mind. Tell the truth about what? A knock at the door startled her. Grace quickly slipped the photograph beneath a magazine on the table before. Opening the door, Ethan stood in the hallway. For a moment, neither spoke. He immediately noticed the tension in her expression. Everything okay? Grace hesitated. 2 days ago, he had been a stranger. Now she knew he was one of the most powerful men in America. Yet somehow he still looked exactly like the exhausted man she had found beside the road. You never told me who you were. Ethan sighed quietly. I was hoping for a little more time before that conversation. Billionaire Chief Executive Officer seems like important information. A faint smile crossed his face. Fair criticism. Grace stepped aside. Ethan entered the apartment. The familiar warmth hit him immediately. Noah's backpack rested beside the couch. Crayons sat scattered across the coffee table. Real life. Honest life. The kind money could never manufacture. Grace folded her arms. Why hide it? Ethan looked around the room before answering. Because sometimes people see the title before they see the person. And you thought I would treat you differently? Would you? Grace considered the question. Then she surprised herself. No, Ethan laughed softly. That is exactly why I did not want you to know. The tension eased slightly. Then Grace reached beneath the magazine and pulled out the photograph. Ethan's smile disappeared instantly. This arrived today. She handed it to him. Ethan examined the image carefully. His eyes widened the moment he recognized his father. Then he noticed Sarah. Finally, he saw the handwritten message. A long silence followed. Where did you get this? It was left outside my door. Ethan looked up sharply. No return address. Nothing. He studied the photograph again. His pulse quickened. The image alone was significant. The message made it explosive. Someone wanted the truth uncovered. But they were staying hidden. There is something you are not telling me, Grace said quietly. Ethan lowered the photograph. There is a lot I am not telling you. Does it have something to do with my mother? He looked directly into her eyes. Yes. The honesty of the answer took her by surprise. Then tell me. Ethan walked toward the window. Outside, evening sunlight painted the apartment building's gold. For years he had been trained to protect the company, protect the family, protect the legacy. Yet standing here felt different. Grace deserved answers. Your mother worked for Carter Holdings many years ago, he said carefully. I know that much. Grace stared. How? I found records. Records? Records someone tried very hard to erase. Grace's heart began to race. Every memory of her mother suddenly felt different. The late nights. The unexplained sadness. The way Sarah always changed the subject whenever Grace asked about her past. Ethan continued. The official story does not make sense. Meaning I think your mother was punished for something she did not do. Grace slowly sat down. Her hands trembled slightly. For years, she had accepted the limited version of events she had been given. Now cracks were appearing everywhere. Ethan placed the photograph on the table between them. Someone sent this because they want us asking questions. Us. Grace repeated. Ethan nodded. Because whether we like it or not, our stories are connected now. Before Grace could respond, Ethan's phone buzzed. A new message appeared from Daniel. Urgent. We found a safety deposit box registered to Sarah Miller. Contents sealed since 2001. Ethan stared at the screen, then slowly looked back at Grace. Because somewhere inside that forgotten box might be the answers they had both been searching for. And for the first time in 25 years, the truth was finally within reach. The next morning arrived with a strange mixture of anticipation and dread. Grace barely touched her coffee. Noah chatted happily about school, completely unaware that the foundation of his mother's understanding of the past was beginning to shift beneath her feet. By 9 o'clock, Grace and Ethan were sitting across from each other in a private office at a downtown bank. The room smelled faintly of polished wood and old paper. A bank manager carefully reviewed identification documents before disappearing through a secured door. Neither spoke much while they waited. The silence felt heavier than before. This was no longer about curiosity. This was about answers. Finally, the manager returned carrying a small metal box. Miss Miller, he said gently, placing it on the table. This account was opened by your mother in 2001. You are listed as the beneficiary. Grace stared at the box. Her hands suddenly felt cold. For years she had believed there was nothing left to discover about Sarah Miller. Now a piece of her mother was sitting directly in front of her. The manager quietly excused himself, leaving them alone. Grace took a slow breath and lifted the lid. Inside were only 3 items. A sealed envelope, a leather-bound journal, and a small silver key attached to a faded blue ribbon. Ethan watched carefully as Grace picked up the envelope. Her mother's handwriting covered the front. For my daughter. Tears immediately filled Grace's eyes. She had not seen that handwriting in years. Carefully, she opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. The first line stole the air from her lungs. If you are reading this, it means the truth finally found its way to you. Grace swallowed hard and continued reading. Sarah described the years she worked at Carter Holdings. She described discovering financial records that revealed misconduct involving senior executives. She described trying to report what she found through official channels. Instead of being protected, she became isolated, discredited, forced out. Yet the deeper Grace read, the more surprising the story became. Sarah never mentioned revenge, never mentioned anger. Instead, she wrote repeatedly about protecting someone. Ethan leaned forward. Protecting who? Grace continued reading until she found the answer. Her eyes widened. You. Ethan froze. Me? Grace nodded slowly. Sarah explained that Richard Carter eventually learned what had happened. According to the letter, Ethan had been a young man at the time, preparing to enter the family business. Richard feared the scandal would destroy both the company and his son's future. So he made a terrible choice. He buried the evidence. Sarah lost everything. The company survived. Ethan stared at the table. A lifetime of assumptions suddenly felt fragile. Grace kept reading. Then she reached the final page. Her voice became barely audible. She never blamed you. Ethan looked up. Grace wiped away a tear. She wrote that one day you might be forced to carry the consequences of decisions you never made. The room fell silent. Ethan felt something crack inside him. For years he had carried the Carter name like armor. Now it felt more like a burden. Grace opened the journal next. Page after page contained notes, dates, names, and observations. Sarah had documented everything. Every conversation, every meeting, every warning. The evidence was detailed, careful, impossible to dismiss. Then a folded photograph slipped from between the pages. Grace picked it up. This one was different from the others. It showed Sarah standing beside Richard Carter. Both were smiling. On the back, Richard had written a single sentence. "Someday I will make this right." Ethan closed his eyes. His father had known. He had known all along. Grace slowly turned to the final item in the box. The small silver key. Attached to it was a note written in Sarah's handwriting. "The key opens the place where the final truth is hidden." Grace stared at the words. Ethan stared at them too. Because after 25 years of secrets, lies, and silence, they had finally uncovered proof. But somewhere beyond that key waited the one truth neither of them was prepared to face. The key led them to a storage facility on the edge of Columbus that had existed for decades without attracting attention. 2 days later, Grace and Ethan stood inside a narrow hallway lined with metal doors. The manager checked the paperwork, compared identification, and finally pointed them toward Unit 314. Grace's heart pounded as she slid the silver key into the lock. The mechanism clicked immediately. For a moment, neither moved. Then she slowly pulled the door open. The storage unit was surprisingly small. A single wooden trunk sat in the center beneath a layer of dust. Nothing else. No furniture. No boxes. No hidden fortune. Just one trunk that had remained untouched for 25 years. Grace knelt beside it and lifted the lid. Inside were folders, photographs, cassette recordings, and several notarized statements. Sarah Miller had preserved everything, every piece of evidence, every witness account, every document that proved what had happened. Ethan carefully reviewed the records while Grace examined the photographs. The deeper they looked, the clearer the story became. Sarah had been telling the truth from the beginning. Multiple executives had known it. Several had quietly supported her. Yet fear had kept them silent. At the very bottom of the trunk sat one final envelope marked "Open Last." Grace carefully unfolded the letter inside. This one was addressed to both her and anyone who eventually uncovered the truth. Sarah's words felt as though they had traveled through time. She wrote that carrying bitterness would only create more pain. She wrote that justice mattered, but so did mercy. Most of all, she wrote that the next generation deserved better than the mistakes of the last. Tears slipped down Grace's cheeks as she finished reading. Ethan remained silent beside her. For the first time in his life, he understood the full cost of decisions made long before he became chief executive officer. The following weeks changed everything. Independent investigators reviewed the evidence. Former employees stepped forward. Archived records were restored. Public statements were issued. Carter Holdings formally acknowledged what had happened to Sarah Miller and cleared her name completely. The story spread quickly, but what surprised many people was what happened next. Ethan refused to hide from it. Standing before employees, shareholders, and reporters, he accepted responsibility for correcting the past, even though the decisions had never been his. He announced a scholarship foundation in Sarah Miller's name for single parents pursuing education and career opportunities. More importantly, he ensured her story became part of the company's history instead of being erased from it. One evening several months later, Grace stood beside a newly dedicated memorial garden outside Carter Holdings headquarters. A bronze plaque carried her mother's name along with a simple inscription about courage and integrity. Employees stopped throughout the day to read it. Some left flowers. Others left handwritten notes. Sarah Miller was no longer forgotten. Noah ran across the grass chasing fireflies while the sun settled behind the city skyline. Ethan stood nearby watching him laugh. "He is getting faster," Ethan said. Grace smiled. "He never walks anywhere. Only runs." They stood quietly for a moment. The breeze carried the scent of fresh-cut grass through the garden. For the first time since the stormy night that had started everything, peace felt possible. "You know," Grace said softly, "my mother would have liked this place." Ethan nodded. I think she would have liked you too. Grace looked toward the plaque bearing Sarah's name. She spent years protecting the truth. And you helped bring it back. Grace shook her head gently. No, I just stopped my car. Ethan smiled. Yet both knew it was much more than that. One small act of kindness had uncovered a hidden history, restored a woman's dignity, and changed countless lives. As Noah raced toward them waving a jar filled with glowing fireflies, Grace felt something she had not felt in years. Not relief, not victory, something quieter. Hope. Because sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do is help a stranger. And sometimes that stranger helps reveal who you were always meant to become.